When my fiancé's family forced me to sign a prenup, they thought they were protecting him from a gold digger. What they didn't know was that I had a $28 million inheritance waiting for me, and the prenup they pushed for ended up destroying their arrogance forever. My name is Olivia Harris. I'm 27 years old, and I grew up in a regular, working-class family. My parents taught me to work hard, to value honesty, and to never look down on anyone. I've never been rich, but I've never been ashamed of where I came from either. I met Daniel Walker when I was 25. He was 2 years older than me, tall, well-dressed, and had the kind of smile that made everyone in the room pay attention. He worked in finance, came from a comfortable family, and seemed like the kind of man who knew exactly what he wanted in life. For a while, I thought I had gotten lucky. He treated me well, we had fun together, and I could picture a future with him. But from the start, I knew his parents didn't like me. Richard and Barbara Walker were the type of people who measured worth in money and status. They were polite to my face, but it was the kind of politeness that made you feel small, like you didn't belong. Barbara especially had this way of smiling that wasn't really a smile at all. She would ask me questions that sounded normal, but carried a hidden insult. Things like, "What does your family do again?" Or, "You must find all of this overwhelming, don't you?" Daniel brushed it off whenever I brought it up. He'd say, "That's just how my mom is." Or, "Don't take it personally, they'll warm up to you." I wanted to believe him, so I let it go. When Daniel proposed to me, I said yes without hesitation. I was in love, and despite his parents, I believed we could build a good life together. But the moment our engagement became official, his family's true colors showed even more. Barbara sat me down one afternoon, her voice sugar-sweet, but her eyes sharp as glass. "You know, Olivia," she said, "Daniel has worked very hard for everything he has. It's only fair that we protect him from risks. We'd like you to sign a prenuptial agreement. It's just business, nothing personal." I remember sitting there, my stomach twisting. A prenup? I wasn't marrying Daniel for money. I didn't care about what he owned. The request felt like an insult, like they saw me as nothing more than a woman chasing their son's bank account. When I told Daniel how I felt, I expected him to stand up for me. Instead, he sighed and said, "Liv, it's just paperwork. My parents won't drop it, and it's easier to keep the peace. It doesn't mean I don't trust you." But it did mean that. At least to me. I felt cornered, as if my love had to be proven through a signature. Still, I told myself that love required sacrifice, and maybe this was mine. So I agreed. I signed their papers, swallowed my pride, and told myself it didn't matter. But deep down, something in me shifted that day. When the subject of the prenup first came up, I didn't take it well. I thought marriage was supposed to be about trust and building a life together, not signing contracts like we were entering a business deal. I told Daniel I didn't feel comfortable with it. I told him it made me feel like I wasn't good enough, like I was being judged before we even had a chance to start our life together. He listened for a moment, then shook his head with that calm, rehearsed tone he always used when he wanted me to stop arguing. "Olivia, you're making this bigger than it is. My parents just want to be cautious. It's not personal." But how could it not be personal? His parents didn't know me well enough to mistrust me, yet they had already decided I wasn't worthy. I could feel it every time Barbara opened her mouth. She'd lean in close with her perfect posture, smiling like a queen speaking to one of her subjects. "It's just common sense to make sure Daniel's future isn't tied down," she told me. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like I should nod along and thank her for her wisdom. Richard wasn't any better. He didn't insult me directly. He just treated me as if I weren't there. Whenever we sat down for dinner or a family gathering, he would talk business with Daniel or ask Barbara about her social events. He never asked me a single question. If I tried to join in, he'd glance past me and change the subject, as though my words carried no weight. I wanted to believe Daniel would see how unfair this was, but whenever I told him how small they made me feel, he brushed it aside. "Liv, you're overreacting. That's just how my parents are. Don't take it to heart." The more he said it, the more I realized he didn't plan to stand up for me at all. One night, I poured everything out to my best friend, Claire Bennett. We'd known each other since college, and she had always been the one to tell me the truth, even when it hurt. When I told her about the prenup and how Daniel was acting, she didn't sugarcoat it. "Olivia, this is a bad sign. If he really respected you, he wouldn't let his parents treat you this way. The fact that he's siding with them instead of you? That's not love. That's control." Her words stung because they rang true. I wanted to defend Daniel, to argue that he was under pressure from his parents too. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. Still, I wasn't ready to let go of the life I thought I was building. I convinced myself that marriage meant compromise, and maybe this was one of those battles I had to surrender for the bigger picture. When the papers were finally put in front of me, my hands trembled. I hesitated, my eyes scanning the lines I barely understood. It wasn't just about money, it was about what it represented. Signing meant agreeing that I wasn't to be trusted, that I was marrying Daniel for the wrong reasons. My pride screamed at me to walk away. My heart begged me to stay. Daniel's voice was soft beside me. Come on, Liv. It's just a formality. You know I love you. Don't let this get in the way of us. I looked at him, searching for something, anything, that showed he understood what this meant to me. But all I saw was impatience hiding behind a practiced smile. So I picked up the pen. I signed my name, my chest tight with a mixture of love, anger, and defeat. Daniel kissed my cheek as if nothing significant had happened, but I knew better. Something inside me had shifted. I smiled at him, but inside a quiet storm had begun. It was small, almost silent, but it was there. A seed of resentment, planted deep, waiting for its time to grow. From the moment we started planning the wedding, it no longer felt like mine. Barbara swooped in with a binder full of ideas and contacts, talking over me as if I wasn't even in the room. Every time I tried to suggest something, she would nod politely and then find a way to undo it later. I had chosen soft blush roses for the centerpieces, but when I walked into the florist meeting, Barbara had already switched them out for lilies, saying they were more refined. She even called the decorator without telling me, changing the color scheme I had spent weeks deciding on. I wanted to scream, but Daniel told me to let it go. She just wants the best for us, he said, his arm around me like he was comforting me. Besides, she's paying for most of it. Don't stress over the little stuff. To me, it wasn't little. It was my wedding. But every time I pushed back, he dismissed me with the same calm tone, as if I was a child throwing a tantrum. The tension only grew whenever our families were together. My parents, Robert and Patricia, did their best to be polite, but I could see how uncomfortable they were. My mom would sit quietly, her hands folded in her lap, while Barbara dominated the conversations. My dad, who was usually talkative and cheerful, seemed withdrawn, his words short and stiff. My younger sister Hannah, who had been so excited to help with the planning, barely spoke a word at those dinners. The Walkers made them feel like outsiders, and no one even tried to hide it. I felt caught in the middle, desperate to make everyone happy but failing at every turn. Each time I confided in Daniel, he told me I was being too sensitive. You always think the worst of them, he said. Why can't you just relax and enjoy this? It's supposed to be fun. Fun. That was the last word I would use for it. The wedding day came, beautiful on the surface, but for me, it was laced with dread. Every detail screamed Barbara's touch, the flowers, the food, even the seating arrangements. When I looked around, I didn't see my vision, I saw her. My family sat off to the side, quiet and uncomfortable, surrounded by strangers who treated them as though they didn't belong. Still, I smiled. I smiled through the photographs, through the ceremony, through the congratulations. I smiled until my cheeks ached. And then came the reception. The music quieted, glasses clinked, and Barbara stood to give her toast. She raised her champagne flute, her smile wide and satisfied. Love, she began, is a wonderful thing. It brings two people together, it builds families, and it gives us joy. But, she added, her eyes sweeping across the room before landing on me, love must always be partnered with prudence. We've all heard stories of people who make mistakes, who give away too much. But not here. Here, we've made sure Daniel's future is safe. And for that, we can celebrate with full hearts. Laughter and applause followed. I felt the heat rise in my face, my stomach twisting like I'd swallowed glass. She hadn't just made a toast, she had made a point, in front of everyone, that I was the mistake they had protected their son from. I forced my lips into a smile as cameras flashed, but inside, I wanted to vanish. No one else seemed to notice the weight of her words, or maybe they just didn't care. Daniel clinked his glass with hers, smiling proudly, as if he agreed with every word. My parents kept their heads down. Hannah avoided my eyes. That night, surrounded by music and laughter, with my hand in my new husband, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. Months passed after the wedding, and life settled into a rhythm that felt both heavy and empty. I went through the motions, working, cooking, attending family dinners where Barbara found new ways to remind me I was beneath them. Daniel seemed more focused on work than on us, and I told myself this was just how marriage worked, that things would get better if I was patient enough. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was from a lawyer in Chicago, someone I had never spoken to before. He introduced himself as the executor of my great-uncle Edward's estate. My heart sank at first. Uncle Edward, my father's uncle, had passed away quietly at the age of 89. He had lived alone most of his life, never married, no children, and only kept loose ties with the rest of the family. I had met him a handful of times at gatherings when I was younger, but the Walkers barely knew he existed. To them, he was just some old relative on my side of the family. The lawyer's voice was calm and steady as he explained what I had inherited. At first, I thought I heard him wrong. He repeated it, each word sinking deeper. $28 million. $28 million. My great-uncle had left everything he had to me. Stocks, property, accounts, it was all in my name. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the wall, unable to form words. I wasn't rich. I had never been rich. And now, overnight, I was wealthier than Daniel and his entire family combined. My hands trembled as I scribbled down details, though I barely understood half of what he was telling me. When the call ended, I sat in silence for what felt like hours, trying to breathe. The first person I told was Claire. I met her for coffee that evening, still pale from the shock. She listened as I stumbled through the story, her eyes widening with every sentence. When I finally told her the number, she nearly dropped her cup. "Olivia, do you realize what this means?" she whispered. "I don't even know what to do," I admit. "Daniel doesn't know. His parents don't know. No one does. Part of me thinks I should tell him, but nothing," she cut in, leaning across the table. "Don't you dare tell them yet. You've seen how they treat you when they think you have nothing. This is your chance to see who they really are without the money in the picture. If they can't respect you now, what do you think will happen when they find out you're worth more than all of them combined?" Her words echoed in my head long after I left the cafe. She was right. If I told Daniel and his family immediately, the entire dynamic would change. They would suddenly become warm, welcoming, even loving, but it wouldn't be real. It would be greed dressed up as affection. So I kept quiet. I didn't change anything about my routine. I didn't buy new clothes, didn't move money around, didn't drop hints. I kept living in the same house, eating the same meals, pretending I was the same Olivia Harris who had walked into this marriage with nothing but love. Inside, though, I carried a secret so large it was almost suffocating. Every time Barbara sneered at me, every time Richard ignored me, every time Daniel brushed off my feelings, the secret pulsed inside me like a heartbeat. I wanted to laugh in their faces, to tell them I could buy and sell everything they owned without blinking. But I didn't. Not yet. At night, lying beside Daniel, I thought about the papers I had signed. The prenup that was supposed to keep me out of their money. They had pushed it on me to keep their fortune safe from me, never realizing I would end up with one far greater. The irony wasn't lost on me. I almost smiled in the dark, my face turned away from him. I decided then that I would wait. I would watch. I would let them keep believing I had nothing. Let them show me exactly who they were when there was nothing for them to gain. And when the time came, when the truth finally came out, they would see just how badly they had misjudged me. It didn't take long for little cracks to start showing in my marriage. At first, they were easy to ignore, the kind of things you tell yourself are just part of adjusting to married life. But slowly, those cracks deepened, and I couldn't pretend anymore. Daniel had always been busy with work, but now he seemed to think his job excused him from everything else. We both worked full-time, yet when we got home, it was as if I became the housekeeper. If the laundry piled up, he wouldn't touch it. If the sink was full of dishes, he'd walk right past. When I asked him to help, he'd sigh, as though I was nagging him. "You're home earlier than me," he'd say. "It just makes sense for you to take care of it." Soon, it wasn't just about the chores. He started expecting me to anticipate his needs, setting out his clothes before work, cooking exactly what he liked for dinner, even making his coffee the way his mom did. If I forgot or made a mistake, he'd frown and shake his head, muttering that I should know better by now. Things were even worse when we visited his parents. Barbara and Richard no longer treated me like a guest in their home. Instead, they treated me like hired help. Barbara would call me into the kitchen and hand me stacks of plates to carry out. Richard would ask me to refill drinks for their friends, as if I were a waitress. Meanwhile, Daniel would sit comfortably at the table, laughing with his parents, never once stepping in to help me. One Sunday, Barbara handed me a rag and pointed to the wine glasses, saying, "Be a dear and polish these before dessert." I looked at her, then at Daniel, waiting for him to say something. He didn't even glance my way. I did it, because causing a scene would have only made things worse, but inside, something shifted. I realized then that to them, I wasn't a wife. I was staff. Daniel's attitude at home only made it worse. He began throwing out little comments that cut deeper than he realized, or maybe he did realize and just didn't care. If I disagreed with him, he'd smirk and say, "You're lucky I married you at all. Most men in my position wouldn't." If I complained about his parents, he'd snap, "You should be grateful they even let you into this family." The words stayed with me, replaying in my head long after he had moved on. Each time, I felt myself pulling further away from him. I stopped reaching for his hand when we walked together. I stopped trying to share my thoughts or feelings, because I knew he wouldn't listen. I went silent, keeping my secrets close. In private, though, my mind was far from silent. While I nodded along to his dismissive words, I was planning. Every insult, every chore, every moment of being treated like less, it all stacked inside me, building into something sharp and unshakable. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't try to change his mind. I smiled when he expected me to, did the work they pushed onto me, and kept my voice even. But behind the mask, I was detaching piece by piece. My love for him was fading, replaced by a cold kind of clarity. Daniel thought he had control. His parents thought they had me figured out. None of them saw the truth. I was no longer the quiet, eager to please wife they believed I was. I was waiting, watching, preparing for the moment when I wouldn't have to pretend anymore. It happened on a quiet evening at the Walker's house. Daniel had stepped into the study with his mother while I was helping clear the table after dinner. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but as I carried a tray of glasses down the hallway, I heard Barbara's sharp voice through the half-closed door. "She's not one of us," Barbara said, her words cutting through the air like glass. "At least the prenup keeps her from ever touching the family's money." I froze. My chest tightened, and I held my breath, waiting for Daniel to correct her, to say something, anything, to defend me. But he didn't. Instead, I heard his voice, steady and calm, agreeing with her. "I know, Mom. It's better this way." Those words crushed me. For months I had told myself that signing the prenup was just paperwork, that Daniel really loved me, that he didn't see me the way his parents did. I had sacrificed my pride, swallowed every insult, and convinced myself it was for love. And now I heard the truth. To him, I wasn't his partner. I was an outsider he had married out of convenience, protected against with a legal contract. I stood there in the hallway, clutching the tray until my fingers hurt, and I realized my chest wasn't just heavy, it was hollow. Something inside me broke that night, and there was no fixing it. When I finally confronted Daniel later at home, my voice shook, but I forced the words out. "I heard what you said to your mother. You agreed with her. You let her call me less than you, and you didn't say a word for me." He looked at me with that familiar impatience, the same expression he wore when I complained about chores or his parents' behavior. "Olivia, you're blowing this out of proportion," he said flatly. "You need to stop being so sensitive." "I'm your wife," I snapped, my voice louder now. "How can you sit there and let them treat me like garbage? How can you agree that I don't belong?" He shrugged as if my pain was a nuisance. "You should know your place. My family has expectations, and you knew that when you married me. You're lucky I've been as patient as I have." Those words burned more than anything else. Lucky, as if being married to him was some kind of gift I should be grateful for, no matter how badly he or his parents treated me. I stared at him, my hands trembling, my throat tight, and in that moment I knew I was finished. The man I had once loved was gone, or maybe he had never been who I thought he was at all. All those times I told myself to be patient, all those sacrifices I made, had led me here, to a marriage where I wasn't respected, wasn't defended, wasn't even seen as equal. But as much as it hurt, there was also a strange calm settling over me. I wasn't going to cry in front of him, and I wasn't going to beg for his understanding. I was done giving him that power. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing beside me. My heart was broken, yes, but there was something else now too, a spark I hadn't felt before. It was the spark of resolve. I decided right then that I would leave him, but I wouldn't leave quietly. No, if his family thought they had won by forcing that prenup, if they thought they had put me in my place, then they had no idea what was coming. My revenge would be quiet, patient, and unforgettable. And when it was done, they would regret every single word they had ever spoken about me. The morning after I decided I was finished with Daniel, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney. Sitting in that office, I felt nervous but strangely calm. I handed over the prenup papers and explained my situation. The attorney read them carefully, her eyes flicking across each page before she leaned back in her chair with a small smile. "Well, Olivia," she said, "they thought they were protecting Daniel, but what they really did was protect you. This agreement makes sure you'll never touch their money, yes, but it also means they'll never touch yours. Your inheritance is completely safe." I almost laughed at the irony. The very document his parents had pushed so hard for, the one that had humiliated me, was now my shield. They had built a wall to keep me out, never realizing they were locking themselves out of something far greater. I walked out of that office with my head held higher than it had been in months. For the first time since the wedding, I felt like I had power, and I knew exactly when I would use it. A week later, the Walkers invited us to a formal dinner at their home. Barbara loved to show off her hosting skills, and I could tell by the guest list, family, friends, business partners, that she was trying to paint a picture of success and control. I went along quietly, sitting beside Daniel, smiling politely, playing the role of the dutiful wife one last time. The conversation circled around money, as it always did with investments, property, deals, the kind of talk meant to impress everyone at the table. I listened, sipping my wine, waiting for my moment. Then, casually, as Barbara bragged about the Walker family's careful financial planning, I placed my glass down and said, "It's funny you mention that. My great-uncle Edward left me quite a bit when he passed. 28 million, actually." The words hung in the air like a firecracker that had just gone off. Barbara's hand slipped, and her wine glass shattered against the floor, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth. Richard's face drained of color as he stammered, "T28 million?" Daniel sat frozen beside me, his mouth slightly open, his fork still in his hand. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence work its way around the room before I smiled sweetly. "But don't worry," I added, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut. "Thanks to the prenup you all insisted on, not a single dollar of my money will ever belong to Daniel." The shift in the room was instant. Barbara forced out a laugh, her voice shaky. "Oh, Olivia, that's wonderful news. We're just so happy for you, dear." Richard chimed in with a stiff smile. "Yes, incredible. Truly incredible. We had no idea Edward was that well off." Even Daniel finally found his voice, stuttering. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Their sudden kindness was almost comical. The same people who had treated me like nothing, who had talked about me behind my back, were now tripping over themselves to look supportive. Their words dripped with sweetness, but I could see the panic behind their eyes. They knew exactly what this meant. All their arrogance, all their control, had just backfired. I sat there enjoying every second of it. For once, I didn't feel small or out of place. I didn't feel like their servant or their burden. I felt powerful. I had the upper hand, and they couldn't do anything to take it away. I lifted my glass again, smiling as if nothing at all was unusual, and let them scramble to cover their shock. Inside, I was glowing. This was only the beginning, and they had no idea what was coming next. The week after that dinner, I filed for divorce. Walking into the courthouse with the papers in my hand felt like stepping out of a cage. For months, I had lived under their control, swallowing every insult, every slight. Now, I was finally cutting myself free. When Daniel was served the papers, his reaction was nothing like I expected. He didn't get angry right away. Instead, he crumbled. He followed me around the house, begging me to reconsider. "Olivia, please. I'll change. I'll do better. I know I've made mistakes, but we can fix this." His voice cracked, his eyes wide with desperation, but I felt nothing. I had given him chance after chance, and he had thrown them away every time. When begging didn't work, he tried bargaining. "We can start over. We'll move out, just us, no more dinners at my parents'. I promise things will be different. Please don't do this." His words bounced off me like raindrops on glass. I had once dreamed of hearing him say those things, but now they sounded hollow. He wasn't fighting for me. He was fighting for his comfort, for his image, for the life he thought he controlled. Barbara, however, didn't bother with pretending. When she found out, she called me directly, her voice sharp and full of venom. "How dare you do this to my son? After everything we've given you, this is how you repay us? You are selfish, Olivia. Manipulative. You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? You were waiting to trap us." I listened without interrupting, letting her words spill out like poison. When she finally paused, waiting for me to defend myself, I simply said, "Barbara, this is between Daniel and me. Your insults don't matter anymore." And then I hung up. That silence on the other end was more satisfying than anything else I could have said. The legal process was almost laughably simple. Because of the prenup they had insisted on, Daniel couldn't touch a cent of my inheritance. Everything my uncle had left me was safe, and the Walkers had no claim on any of it. The very contract that once humiliated me now protected me completely. The day the divorce was finalized, I packed my things and left our house without looking back. I wasn't angry and I wasn't sad. I was free. I found an apartment in the city, bright and quiet, where no one expected me to play a role or prove my worth. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Daniel walked away with nothing but regret. His parents were furious, their pride shattered, their plans ruined. And me? I was untouchable. The chains they had tried to wrap around me had turned to dust, and I stepped out into my new life stronger than I had ever been. It didn't take long for the story to spread. People in the Walkers' circle loved to gossip, and soon everyone knew what had happened. The family that once bragged about their wealth and power was now the butt of every whispered conversation. At dinner parties and business gatherings, people laughed quietly about how Richard and Barbara had forced a prenup only to watch their son lose his marriage and any chance of touching my inheritance. Their arrogance had turned into their humiliation. Daniel didn't handle it well. Without me in the picture, he moved back into his parents' house. He was no longer the charming fiancé everyone admired, but a man scrambling to get by, depending on his parents just to keep afloat. The same man who once told me I was lucky to have him now lived off the very people who had treated me like dirt. Meanwhile, my life was finally my own. I bought a home I had always dreamed of, a warm, sunlit house with a garden where I could breathe freely, no cold glares, no judgment. I invited my parents to stay as often as they liked, and I made sure they would never worry about money again. My dad retired early. My mom finally had the time to do the things she loved, and for the first time, I saw them relax without stress written across their faces. My little sister Hannah was starting college, and I covered her tuition without hesitation. Watching her smile when I told her she wouldn't have to take out loans was worth more than any luxury I could buy for myself. She hugged me so tightly I thought she'd never let go, and in that moment, I knew I was building the kind of future our family had always deserved. I also thought of Uncle Edward, the man who had believed in me even when others didn't bother to see my worth. He had lived a quiet, simple life, but he cared deeply about helping others. In his honor, I began donating to causes he cared about: scholarships for underprivileged kids, community programs, charities he had quietly supported. Every time I gave, I felt closer to him, like I was carrying forward the kindness he had left behind. The Walkers noticed, of course. Their calls started coming after the gossip had turned against them. Barbara's voice, once dripping with disdain, was suddenly sweet as honey. "Olivia, dear, we'd love to see you. Let's catch up soon." Richard sent stiff, polite emails. Daniel even texted me late at night, messages filled with regret and empty promises. I never responded. They had made it clear who they thought I was when they believed I had nothing. Now that they knew the truth, they were desperate to rewrite history. But I didn't owe them a second chance. My silence was the sweetest revenge of all, and it spoke louder than anything I could ever say. Looking back, it still amazes me how everything turned out. The Walkers had built their lives on arrogance and pride, always believing they were smarter, richer, and better than everyone else. From the first moment I met them, I felt the weight of their judgment. They never truly cared about me as a person. They only cared about protecting what they thought was theirs. That was why they pushed so hard for the prenup, treating me like some kind of threat rather than their son's partner. For a while, I thought they had won. I thought signing that paper meant I had given away my dignity. I remember how small I felt at that wedding, listening to Barbara's smug toast, pretending to smile while humiliation burned inside me. What I didn't know then was that the very thing they believed would protect them would one day undo them completely. The prenup became their trap. They had written me out of their world, never realizing they were also writing themselves out of mine. When my uncle's inheritance came, everything shifted. I didn't even have to fight for justice. The document they forced on me did it for me. Their greed had built the walls, and those same walls kept them from ever touching a single dollar of what was mine. I used to think revenge meant yelling, fighting, proving myself to people who had wronged me. But as time passed, I realized the sweetest revenge was simpler. It was living free of them. It was building a life where I didn't need their approval, their name, or their money. Every time they tried to reach out, desperate to mend what they had broken, my silence reminded them of what they lost. And I know it eats at them every single day. The truth is, I didn't just keep my inheritance safe. I reclaimed myself. I found peace in giving my family comfort, in helping others, in surrounding myself with people who valued me for who I was. Meanwhile, Daniel and his parents are stuck in the prison of their own making, bitter, embarrassed, and left with nothing but their pride. I sometimes wonder if they regret how they treated me. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I walked away stronger than I ever thought I could be. They wanted to keep me from their fortune. Instead, they locked themselves out of mine. $28 million later, I walked away free, and I've never looked back. What do you think about how Olivia handled everything? Was she right to cut ties and build a new life on her own? Or do you think she should have tried to work things out with Daniel and his parents? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to see different opinions. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notifications so you can catch the next story as soon as it's posted.